My brother forged my DEA license to run an opioid scheme out of my pharmacy. When investigators came, he handed them everything they needed to arrest me instead. My father looked me in the eye in that courtroom and said, "She always wanted too much." I lost my pharmacy, my license, my marriage, and 18 months of my life. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I made a list. And the morning my suspension was lifted, I made sure my brother was standing in front of 300 people when his world caught fire. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I'm building a global map of listeners and I want your city on it. Quick note. This story weaves powerful lessons with fictionalized drama for emotional impact and reflection. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. But the message? That one's yours to keep. The fluorescent light above the pharmacy counter has been flickering for 11 days. I know because I've been counting everything lately. The pills in the inventory tray, the steps from the back office to the dispensing window. The number of times my brother's name appears in the investigation file I've memorized, cover to cover. 412. My name is Cassandra Monroe. Most people call me Cass. I am 31 years old, and I built Monroe Family Pharmacy from a shuttered Walgreens location in a strip mall in Cedar Park, Texas, into a 3-location independent chain with a compounding lab and a loyal customer base of over 4,000 patients. I did it in 6 years, working 18-hour days, sleeping on the cot in the back office more nights than I slept in my own bed. My brother did not help me build it. He did help himself to it. Let me tell you how we got here. And then let me tell you what I did about it. I graduated from the University of Texas College of Pharmacy in May of 2016. My mother took photos. My father shook my hand at the ceremony, which was the most physical affection he had offered me in approximately 4 years. On the drive home, he said to my mother, loud enough for me to hear from the back seat, "Marcus should have gone into pharmacy instead of sales. He has the people skills for it." Marcus is my older brother. He is 3 years older than me. Charismatic in the way that men who have never been told no tend to be charismatic. And he had been floating between sales jobs since he was 22. My father had always believed Marcus was the one who needed protecting. I was the one who needed managing. I took a staff pharmacist job at a regional hospital in Austin, and I saved every dollar I made for 2 years. In 2018, I leased the Cedar Park location. The previous tenant had left behind shelving units and a broken refrigerator. I cleaned everything myself. I painted the walls myself. I built the patient consultation area out of IKEA furniture and sheer stubbornness. My first year, I barely broke even. My second year, I turned a profit of $41,000. My third year, I opened the second location in Round Rock. By 2022, Monroe Family Pharmacy had annual revenue of $2.3 million, a compounding lab that served specialty patients from 4 counties, and a reputation that had taken me every single day of 6 years to build. Marcus joined the company in January of 2022. I should have said no. I knew I should have said no. But my mother had been calling every Sunday for 8 months, asking whether I had thought about bringing him on board. My father mentioned it at Thanksgiving in the way that men like my father mention things, quietly, with the full weight of lifelong disapproval behind every syllable. Marcus himself came to dinner one evening in October and sat across from me and said with complete sincerity, "Cass, you need someone who can handle the business side so you can focus on the clinical work. That's where your real value is." I gave him the title of Operations Director. I gave him access to the vendor accounts and the marketing budget. I gave him an office at the Cedar Park location. I watched him spend the first 60 days redecorating it. By spring of 2022, I knew something was wrong. Inventory numbers at the Round Rock location didn't reconcile with dispensing records. Controlled substance logs had entries I didn't recognize. I brought it to my pharmacist in charge at that location. She said she'd noticed the same thing and had assumed it was a data entry error. It was not a data entry error. On a Thursday morning in September of 2022, 3 investigators from the Texas State Board of Pharmacy and 2 DEA agents walked into my Cedar Park location at 9:15 a.m. They had a warrant, they had a file, and at the top of that file, attached to 412 fraudulent prescription records spanning 8 months, was my DEA registration number and my digital signature. I'd never seen any of those prescriptions. The lead investigator was a woman named Agent Paulson. She was professional, efficient, and completely unmoved by anything I said. I told her the signatures were forged. I told her the DEA number had been accessed without my authorization. I showed her the access logs on my pharmacy management system, which I had noticed 3 weeks earlier showed remote logins from an IP address that wasn't mine or any of my staff. She wrote everything down. Then she said, "Miss Monroe, your license is being placed under emergency suspension pending investigation. You will need to cease all dispensing activities immediately." I sat down on the floor of my own pharmacy. Not dramatically. My legs simply stopped holding me. Marcus was not at the Cedar Park location that morning. He had texted me at 7:45 saying he had a vendor meeting in Austin. I found out later that the vendor meeting did not exist. He had known the investigators were coming. He had made sure to be somewhere else. My father drove to the pharmacy that afternoon. He sat in my consultation room with his hands folded on the table and said, without looking at me, "Cassandra, I know this has been a difficult time, but if there are irregularities in the business, you need to take responsibility for them. You're the pharmacist of record. That means the buck stops with you." I stared at him. "Dad." Marcus forged my signature. He ran a pill mill out of my pharmacy. He shook his head. "That's a very serious accusation. Marcus has been trying to help you. He's your brother." That was the last sentence my father said to me for 18 months. My mother came the following week. She sat on the other side of the consultation room glass and she said, "Cass, honey, maybe this is a sign that you are taking on too much. You've always pushed yourself so hard. Maybe this is an opportunity to step back and let Marcus stabilize things." I asked her if she was seriously suggesting I hand my pharmacy to the man who had just destroyed my career. She said, "I just think family is more important than a business." I asked the guard to end the visit. The suspension hearing was brutal. My attorney at the time was a general practice lawyer who had never handled a pharmacy licensing case. The board presented 412 fraudulent prescriptions. They presented testimony from 2 former patients of the scheme who identified interactions they'd had with a pharmacist. Their descriptions did not match me. They matched Marcus, who had occasionally worked the dispensing window when we were short-staffed, which I had allowed because I trusted him. I did not have a forensic document examiner. I did not have a digital forensics expert. I could not afford them. Marcus had quietly and methodically frozen my access to the business accounts 2 weeks before the investigators arrived. By the time I realized the extent of what he had done, I had $4,300 in a personal checking account and a lease on an apartment I could barely pay. The board issued an 18-month suspension of my pharmacist license. 18 months. Marcus was named interim director of operations for all 3 Monroe family pharmacy locations. My parents co-signed his authority with the landlords. I found out by email I had 2 choices in that moment. I could collapse or I could build. I chose to build. I found a job washing dishes at a diner on South Congress. The owner, a woman named Doris who had been running the place for 30 years, knew who I was. She'd been a Monroe patient. She didn't say anything about it. She just handed me an apron and showed me where the dish soap was. I worked the early shift, 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., 6 days a week. I made $11 an hour. The work was hard and honest, and it left my evenings completely free. I used every one of those evenings to prepare. I found my attorney through a legal clinic at UT Austin School of Law. Her name was Diane Reyes. She was 44 years old, a former DEA prosecutor who had switched to defense work after watching a pharmacist client lose everything to a wrongful investigation she hadn't been able to prevent. She read my case file in one sitting. Then she looked up and said, "Someone very close to you knew exactly how pharmacy investigations work." I said, "My brother spent 3 months reading every piece of regulatory guidance the Texas Board of Pharmacy has ever published. I watched him do it. I thought he was trying to learn the business." Diane said, "He was learning how to frame you." Day 1 of my suspension, I cried. I sat in my apartment on a mattress on the floor and I cried until I couldn't breathe. Then I washed my face. I opened a notebook. I wrote 2 words at the top of the first page. Take back. Day 30. I received a letter from the pharmacy. Marcus had rebranded. The signs now read Monroe Pharmacy Group. He had removed my name from the consultation room plaques. He had updated the website to list himself as founder. I photographed the letter. I added it to the file. Day 60. I filed a formal complaint with the Texas Board of Pharmacy's Investigative Division. I included the IP address logs showing remote access from an address registered to a property my brother owned in Pflugerville. The board acknowledged receipt. Day 90. Diane filed a motion demanding forensic examination of the pharmacy management system's audit trail. The board's own investigator had missed the IP log discrepancy. Diane had not. Day 120. I received a call from my brother's wife. She asked to meet. I said yes immediately. Day 121. We met at a coffee shop in Buda, Texas at 7 a.m. She was wearing sunglasses inside. She had a bruise under her left eye that the sunglasses did not entirely cover. I did not say anything about it. I ordered 2 coffees. I put one in front of her. I waited. She wrapped both hands around the cup. She said, "He's going to lose everything anyway. I want you to know I didn't know what he did until after the investigation started." I said, "What do you know now?" She knew a great deal. She knew that Marcus had spent 4 months before the investigation carefully documenting prescriptions under my DEA number, using a remote login credential he had obtained by watching me type my password. She knew he had established a referral arrangement with 2 pain clinic physicians who were themselves under separate DEA scrutiny. She knew he had routed the cash payments through a separate LLC he had formed in Nevada, and that he had been siphoning pharmacy revenue into that account for 7 months before the investigators arrived. She knew all of this because she handled his personal bookkeeping. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I said, "I need everything. Bank records, emails, LLC filings, the works, every document you have access to." She opened her bag. She placed a manila folder on the table. Inside was a USB drive and 43 pages of printed bank statements. I looked at her. "Why?" She looked back at me. "Because he told me you were stealing from him. He showed me forged records to prove it." I testified at the board hearing that I had seen financial irregularities under your management. She paused. "I helped send you to your suspension." And he was lying to me the entire time. I picked up the USB drive. "This ends him." "I know," she said. Good. Day 140. Diane presented the USB contents to the DEA's Diversion Investigators Division. The IP logs, the bank records, the LLC filings, and 14 months of email correspondence between Marcus and the 2 prescribing physicians formed the foundation of what became a federal criminal investigation. Day 160. The Texas Board of Pharmacy's Investigative Division reopened my case. Day 200. I received a letter from the board. A forensic accountant had reviewed the pharmacy management system audit trail. The fraudulent prescription entries had been created using remote access credentials that did not match my standard login pattern. The digital signatures had been generated using a certificate that, upon examination, had been created on a device not registered to me. My suspension status was reclassified to pending reinstatement. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I called Diane. She said, "This is what we needed. Now we finish it." Diane and I had spent 170 days building 3 phases. I want you to understand the precision of this. Every phase was designed not just to expose what Marcus had done, but to make it impossible for him to spin it. Phase 1, the DEA referral. Diane had contacts inside the Diversion Investigators Division from her prosecutor years. The referral packet we submitted was 112 pages. It included the bank records, the LLC structure, the physician referral arrangement, and the IP access logs. We filed it on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Phase 2, the board reinstatement hearing. Diane had retained a forensic document examiner and a digital forensics expert, paid for by a contingency arrangement she offered because she believed in the case. The hearing was scheduled for the same week. The forensic expert's report concluded with one sentence: The electronic signatures on the disputed prescription records were generated using methods inconsistent with the licensed pharmacist's documented access patterns and are consistent with unauthorized remote access by a third party. Phase 3 was my brother's wife. Her name was Rachel. She had signed an immunity proffer with the federal prosecutor's office on day 150. In exchange for full cooperation and testimony regarding the LLC structure and cash payment arrangement, the prosecutor agreed to recommend probation rather than prosecution. What I had not told Diane, and what I had carefully planned for 3 months, was the timing of Phase 1 relative to where Marcus would be when it landed. Marcus had been invited to speak at the Texas Independent Pharmacy Association's annual conference in San Antonio. He was scheduled to present a 45-minute session titled Scaling an Independent Pharmacy, Lessons from Monroe Pharmacy Group. He was going to stand at a podium in front of approximately 250 of my colleagues, my professional peers, the people whose respect I had earned over 6 years, and present my company as his achievement. The DEA referral was filed at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. His presentation was at 2 p.m. that same afternoon. At 12:45, while Marcus was in the conference hotel restaurant having lunch with 2 of the association's board members, his phone began receiving notifications. His business bank accounts had been flagged for federal review. His access to the pharmacy management system had been remotely restricted by order of the DEA. His presentation slides, hosted on a shared cloud account, had been locked pending a records preservation order. At 1:55, 5 minutes before he was scheduled to take the stage, a DEA agent approached him in the conference hallway and served him with a federal subpoena. I know what happened next because a pharmacist I had trained 3 years ago was sitting in the front row and texted me in real time. Marcus walked onto the stage. He stood at the podium. He opened his mouth. His phone buzzed again, and again he looked down at the screen. The association's executive director walked to the edge of the stage. She whispered something to him. Marcus stepped back from the podium. He said, "I need to reschedule." He walked off the stage. 250 people watched him leave. I was sitting in Diane's office when her phone rang at 2:14 p.m. She listened for 30 seconds. She looked at me. She said, "Phase 1 is complete." I closed my eyes. I had been waiting 212 days for that sentence. The DEA executed search warrants on all 3 pharmacy locations and on the P. Flukerville property at 6 a.m. on Thursday. Rachel had provided them with the access codes. They were orderly and professional, and they were done by noon. The investigators removed 7 file boxes of records, 3 computers, and a hard drive from a safe in the Pflugerville property that contained, among other things, approximately $40,000 in cash and a second set of prescription logs that Marcus had never bothered to destroy because he had never believed anyone would look there. That day, the Texas Board of Pharmacy issued a formal statement. My license suspension had been lifted, effective immediately, pending completion of reinstatement processing. The statement further noted that the fraudulent prescription records previously attributed to my license had been formally disavowed by the board's investigative division. 18 months. 412 false prescriptions, $11 an hour at a diner on South Congress. Every one of those days had led to this one. I did not call my parents. They called me, through my attorney, 3 days after Marcus's arrest was reported by the Austin American-Statesman. My father left a message. He said, "Cassandra, we need to talk about the business. The locations need management. Your mother and I want to find a way to resolve this as a family." Diane played me the voicemail once, then she deleted it. My mother sent a letter. She said she had not known the full extent of what Marcus had done. She said she was sorry. She said the family needed to stay together through this. She said she hoped I could find it in my heart to be the bigger person. I read the letter once. I filed it with everything else. My parents had testified at the board hearing. Not dramatically, not with manufactured evidence. They had simply confirmed under oath that they had observed what they described as financial inconsistencies under my management, based on information Marcus had provided to them. They had believed him without question. They had not called me. They had not asked me. They had simply taken his word and handed it to a board of investigators and let it become part of the record that suspended my license. That was their choice. I had made mine. The reinstatement hearing was held on a gray Wednesday morning in downtown Austin. I wore a navy blazer. I sat at the table across from the board members and I answered every question clearly, directly, and without flinching. Diane sat beside me. The forensic expert's report was entered into evidence. Rachel's affidavit was entered into evidence. The DEA's preliminary findings were entered into evidence. The board chair asked me if I had anything to say before they deliberated. I said, I built Monroe Family Pharmacy without a loan, without a partner, and without a safety net. I built it for my patients. I did not cut corners. I did not abuse my license. I did not trade my professional integrity for money. That was never who I was, and this board has now confirmed it on the record. I am asking you to restore my license and allow me to get back to work. The deliberation took 40 minutes. My license was reinstated in full. I walked out of that building into the October air and I stood on the sidewalk and I breathed. Just breathed. Diane stood next to me. She didn't say anything. She understood. Then she said, "What's next?" The federal case moved quickly. Marcus pleaded guilty to distribution of controlled substances, healthcare fraud, and money laundering. The two prescribing physicians entered separate plea agreements. The sentencing hearing was held on a February morning the following year. I sat in the front row. I wanted him to see my face. The victims spoke first. Two of them. Patients who had received fraudulent opioid prescriptions through the scheme and had subsequently developed dependencies. One of them was a woman in her late 40s named Carol, who had come in for legitimate pain management after a car accident and ended up in a treatment program 9 months later. She stood at the lectern and described what the past 2 years had done to her family, to her ability to work, to her marriage. I cried quietly during her statement. It was the only time I cried in that courtroom. Marcus sat at the defense table in a gray suit. He had lost weight. His lawyer, who was excellent and had done what he could with a losing hand, sat very still beside him. I made my statement. I did not have notes. I said, my brother used my name, my license, and my life's work as the vehicle for a federal crime. He did it deliberately, methodically, and without a moment of genuine remorse until the day law enforcement was at his door. He watched me lose my pharmacy, my license, my income, and 18 months of my professional life, and he attended my board suspension hearing as a witness for the prosecution. I am not here to ask for mercy on his behalf. I am here to tell this court that what he took from me was not just a business. It was the product of everything I had, and I am asking that his sentence reflect the full weight of that. I sat down. Diane put her hand on my arm. The judge sentenced Marcus to 11 years in federal prison with no eligibility for supervised release for 7 years. He was ordered to pay restitution of $480,000 to the patients affected by the scheme and $260,000 to me for lost income and legal costs during my suspension. Marcus turned when the marshals came to take him. He looked at me for the first time that day. He opened his mouth. I picked up my bag and walked out before he could speak. My parents were standing on the courthouse steps. My mother had tissues in both hands. My father was gripping the railing. When I came through the door, my mother stepped forward immediately. She said, "Cass, please. We made a terrible mistake. We should have believed you. Please, can we just talk?" I stopped. I looked at her. I looked at my father. I thought about the Sunday dinners where they had passed along Marcus's concerns about my management. I thought about the board hearing where their testimony had been entered as evidence against me. I thought about the voicemail asking me to come back and stabilize the family business. I said, "You had 18 months to ask me whether it was true. You had 18 months to visit, to call, to write a letter, to do anything that a parent does when their child is in trouble. You didn't. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." My mother said, "Cassandra." I walked past her. Diane followed. I did not look back. 6 weeks after the sentencing, I sat across from Rachel at the same coffee shop in Buda, where we had met on day 1, 2020. The breakfast crowd had thinned out. The morning light came through the windows flat and clean. Rachel had served 4 months of her probationary sentence and was completing community service hours at a food bank in Kyle. She looked different. Quieter. She said, "Do you hate me?" I considered the question honestly. I said, "I did. For a while. And now I think you were used just like I was. The difference is you had a choice about whether to keep using me, and eventually you stopped." I paused. That's not the same as forgiveness, but it's the truth. She looked down at her coffee. "I testified against you. You did." I met her eyes, and then you handed me everything I needed to take him down. "You're not my enemy, Rachel. You were a mistake I had to work around." "That's different." She nodded slowly. I paid for both coffees and left. My new practice is called Monroe Dispensary. One location, Cedar Park, Texas. Different strip mall, 2 miles from the original site. 8 employees, a compounding lab, a patient consultation area I designed myself, and a wall in the waiting room where I have hung, framed, the reinstatement letter from the Texas Board of Pharmacy. It is not there as decoration. It is there so that every patient who comes through that door knows what this place cost to build. The restitution payment covered my attorney fees and the startup costs for the new location with a small amount left over, which I placed in a fund I have designated for pharmacy students from first-generation college backgrounds. I hired Diane on retainer, not because I expect more legal battles, because I believe in being prepared. My father reached out through a mutual family friend 6 months after the sentencing. He said he wanted to reconcile. The mutual friend called me and very gently said my father was not doing well emotionally and had expressed deep regret. I listened to the whole message. Then I thanked the friend for calling and said I would think about it. I am still thinking about it. What I know is this: my parents are not evil people. They are people who loved their son more than they trusted their daughter, and who never once asked themselves whether that was fair. That is not something a conversation repairs. That is something a person has to reckon with alone, and the reckoning is theirs, not mine. My brother asked to speak to me through his defense attorney's office 2 months after his sentencing. The attorney's assistant called Diane. Diane called me. I said no. I don't have anything to say to Marcus. I said what I had to say in that courtroom. Whatever he wants to express now is for his own benefit, not mine, and I do not exist to provide that service. My license is active. My compounding lab passed its accreditation inspection with commendations. Last month, Carol, the patient who testified at the sentencing, the woman whose dependency began with fraudulent prescriptions from my pharmacy under my name, came to Monroe Dispensary. She had seen a news article about the reopening. She sat in the consultation room and she said she didn't know whether to be angry at me or just sad. I said both of those were fair. I told her about what had happened, the full account, factually and without self-pity. I told her about the IP logs and the remote access credentials and the Nevada LLC and the plea agreement. I told her about the 18 months and the dishwashing job and the notebook. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to come back as a patient. If you'll have me." I said, "I will be honored to have you." She is one of my 4,000 patients now. Her file has a small note I added myself, handled with care. Here is what 18 months of losing everything taught me. When someone shows you who they are in a crisis, believe them. My brother showed me who he was the morning he watched investigators walk into my pharmacy and said nothing. My parents showed me who they were the day they let his testimony stand without a single question. I spent 6 years thinking I was building a family business. I was building a target. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I say it with clarity. The pharmacy I have now is smaller. The revenue is lower. The pressure is exactly what I can carry. I designed it that way. I know who has access to what and why, and I verify it monthly. I do not give access to people because I love them. I give access to people because they have earned it, and because the systems I have built will catch them immediately if they abuse it. That is not distrust. That is how you protect what you build. Some people will tell you that forgiveness is how you free yourself. They may be right for them. I am not interested in freeing my brother or my parents from the weight of what they did to me. I am interested in building a life that is entirely, irreversibly mine. Those are different goals, and I have chosen mine deliberately. I go to therapy on Thursday evenings. My therapist, who is extraordinarily patient, says I have made significant progress in separating my sense of self-worth from my professional achievements. She is right that I was doing that. I built Monroe Family Pharmacy because I needed to prove to my father that I was worth something. I built Monroe Dispensary because I love this work. I love my patients, and I am good at it. That is a different foundation. It holds better. I am not in a relationship. I was briefly, he was kissing a woman with long wristband and I ended it because I wasn't ready. I told him that plainly. He appreciated the honesty and we parted without damage, which felt like its own kind of progress. Doris, who owns the diner on South Congress, came to the reopening. She sat at the consultation table and had coffee. She said, "You look like yourself again." I said I thought I was more myself than I'd ever been. She patted my hand and said, "That's the idea. If you are listening to this and you recognize something in it, if you have a Marcus in your life or a father who quietly chose someone else over you, or a moment where you realized that the people who were supposed to be in your corner had been whispering to the other side, I want you to hear this. You do not have to forgive them. You do not have to explain yourself. You do not have to maintain relationships that cost you more than they give. Blood is a fact of biology. It is not a contract. What you do have to do is document everything, find the one person who actually shows up, and refuse to stop. Not because the outcome is guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. But because the alternative, which is staying still and waiting for someone to rescue you, has a 0% success rate. I counted 170 days. I built 3 phases. I worked 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. in a diner apron, and then I came home and I studied pharmacy law and federal evidence procedure and DEA regulatory guidelines until midnight. I lost 18 months. I got back the rest of my life. That math works. If this story reached you, if it made you think about your own boundaries, your own family, your own fight, leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you would have made the same choices I made or different ones. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with them. For more stories about survival, justice, and what it looks like to rebuild from nothing, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. The next story is about a woman who spent 4 years watching her best friend take credit for everything she built and the single conversation that changed everything. You don't want to miss it. Take care of yourself first. Until next time.